Welcome to Understanding Communication Changes. This session is for people affected by dementia, primarily for those caring for or connected to someone who's living with dementia, but also for those who are experiencing cognitive changes associated with dementia themselves. We're going to discuss how dementia affects communication and strategies for increasing connection when communication becomes less verbal and more nonverbal. Some of the information may not be applicable to your current situation, but may become more relevant in the future as the disease progresses. You may find some of the information upsetting or alarming to you at first. I encourage you to connect with the First Link Dementia Helpline. The numbers are in the helpful resources linked below this video, as well as at the end of the video. What do you think person-centered means? Another way of thinking about it is to consider this. Do you think that each of the three people pictured here will have the exact same communication styles and support needs? It's important to remember that even though the disease has changed how your family member or friend thinks and communicates, they are still a unique person. They are still a wife, husband, mother, father, sister, brother, grandmother, grandfather, etc. They are still shaped by their cultural beliefs, backgrounds, values, careers, interests, and life experiences. They may still have stories to tell and valuable lessons to teach. And your family member or friend can still feel strong emotional connections, even if they may not be able to articulate them or demonstrate them the way they were once able to. A person-centered philosophy views people with dementia first and foremost as individuals with unique attributes, personal values, and history. Think about how you can use your knowledge of the person you're caring for in your communication with them. This will help guide you in how you respond as communication changes. And if you are someone living with dementia, think about how you would like others to communicate with you. What would be helpful for your family and friends to know? This image might be difficult for some of you to look at, but it's important we understand and recognize that the disease is causing changes to happen in the person's brain, which causes their symptoms. Oftentimes, a person with dementia looks quite healthy, maybe even, quote, normal on the outside, which can make it difficult for those around them to make sense of their symptoms. While there are several different diseases that cause dementia, they share many symptoms. Eventually, most dementias lead to pronounced shrinking of the brain or atrophy. This image demonstrates what the brain of someone with advanced Alzheimer's disease would look like. When you look at the brain on the right, you can see there are profound changes, big gaps and holes. If you think of our brain as a telecommunication network, you can really see that there are likely to be downed power lines all over this brain. You can think of the brain as made up of four regions or lobes on each side of our brains. The frontal lobes are just behind the forehead. The parietal lobes sit at the top and center above the occipital and temporal lobes. The occipital lobes sit at the back of the head, and the temporal lobes sit just behind the ears on each side of our head. The regions of the brain responsible for speech and language are primarily on the left side of the brain, in the left temporal lobe and left frontal lobe. When damage occurs in these regions of the brain as a result of plaques and tangles, vascular damage, or other protein changes, the person has difficulty with communication. The image on this slide demonstrates the key areas of the brain responsible for speech and language. It's not necessary for you to know or remember the medical terms I'm going to share. This section is to help you understand the physiological changes that are causing the symptoms. And also, you may hear these terms used by medical professionals, so you can refer back to this information at a later date if you need clarification. First, information from sound goes through the ears to the primary auditory area, located on both sides of the brain in the temporal lobes, slightly above each ear. The information then flows to Wernicke's area, which is the language comprehension center of the brain, located on the left side of the brain. When this region is damaged, the person has difficulty with language processing, including recognizing individual words and naming objects. Words become difficult to understand, or they lose their meaning. For example, the person may hear the word fork, but not understand what a fork is. This is known as receptive aphasia. You can think of it as problems with language coming in. After the information goes to Wernicke's area for comprehension, it then flows toward the front of the brain to Broca's area, which is responsible for speech production. People who have damage to this area of the brain have expressive aphasia, or difficulty with speech production and language articulation. They may have trouble formulating a response, generating speech, or using full sentences. Someone with expressive aphasia may primarily speak using nouns or verbs or adjectives. For example, they might say, walk dog, instead of, I will take the dog for a walk. In addition, the motor cortex sends messages to our mouth and hands as we speak. So damage in this area results in difficulty articulating words or using gestures. Vocabulary, comprehension of speech, and speech production are all things that are handled in the temporal and frontal lobes. Anomia is a symptom whereby people with dementia experience difficulty in finding the right word and mix up the names of objects or people. Often, someone with anomia speaks in generalities or uses a word that shares something in common with the word or name they're trying to say, such as another form of cutlery, another type of fruit, another name that sounds familiar. Put it another way, they may call a spoon a fork, an orange an apple, or call Fred Frank. Other ways that dementia impacts communication include alexia, when the brain cannot process letters, words, or sentences, which makes it difficult to read. Agraphia, when writing becomes difficult. And this is particularly challenging for people who have compensated for an increasingly damaged memory center by writing themselves notes to read to help them with their daily task. And now writing is now impaired. Think of people needing to write checks or read health agreements. People with dementia may also say things that others feel are inappropriate or offensive. They may also repeat words or phrases over and over again. These symptoms may be due to the loss of filter in the frontal lobe, the part of the brain that reminds us of what is and isn't socially appropriate. People with damage to the frontal lobe may swear, joke inappropriately, or seem flat in their communication. They may also have difficulty understanding humor if it's very abstract. Let's look at a practical example. What do you think this woman might be having difficulty with? When you see this picture, what do you think she is wondering? She could be wondering, what is this thing? Or she may just be trying to work out whether this is a dog or a cat. Or she might be trying to recall the name. Is this Fluffy or Buddy? Does this information help you make sense of some of the communication changes you've been noticing with your family member or friend, or have been experiencing yourself? There's no doubt that we all have communication patterns that can be difficult in many of our relationships, and dementia certainly won't make those communication patterns any better or easier. Dementia can make it very difficult for a person to pay attention, and this can be frustrating for both the person living with dementia and their care partner. You may wander off in the middle of a conversation or lose your train of thought right in the middle of a sentence, forgetting what it was you wanted to say. While this is common with age-related memory decline and our increased distractibility as we get older, it can happen more often among those living with dementia, and they are less likely to be able to pick up the thread of the conversation again. Simply organizing information and thought processes may become increasingly difficult. Many people living with dementia have told us that they can no longer follow the speed and change of subject that often happens with conversations in a social setting. Early in this, people may miss out of 4 words. How long before you got, do you think? I'll say that again because it's such an important point. Early in this, people may miss out of 4 words. How before you got, do you think? Is what I'm saying making any sense? Are you feeling confused and perhaps checking your sound levels? What I was trying to say is this. Early in this disease, people may miss 1 out of every 4 words. How long before you got lost, do you think? While not every dementia affects communication abilities in the same way, this powerful example can help you to understand why it might simply take too long to figure out what is being said. And by the time you have something to say, the conversation has moved on. In the same way, it may be more difficult to follow story plots, whether on TV or in a book. We often hear stories from caregivers of times when they have had angry or frustrating interactions with the person with dementia. And minutes later, the person with dementia has forgotten what the interaction was about, but they apologize or ask if they've done something wrong. They sometimes feel the lingering effects of something bad happening, even though they can no longer recall what it was about. This quote from Maya Angelou says it best. I've learned that people will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Even when a person's ability to express themselves may have changed with the disease, they can still feel and sense emotions. The emotions often say much more than the words do. Remember that even if the person with dementia may have lost the ability to communicate through words and sentences, They may still be able to understand that you are talking about them in front of them. If a person says something like, "I'm right here," or "I'm not stupid," it may mean that they feel excluded from conversations that would normally involve them. Wherever possible, try to include the person with dementia in conversations. We often hear from people living in the early stage of the disease how painful it is when they are excluded. I'd like you to listen carefully for the next minute as I play a recording of 3 short stories. Please pay close attention because I'm going to have some questions about each story afterwards.
Whenever the interpretation finds my family out almost $100 and was left with a very bad feeling. I've never been outside PCA after a run-in. My mom said I was minus 48 degrees. Smith and telling Maddie stories about how world pulled our trailer. We were on the usual afternoon walk from the grocery store on Wednesday.
Phew, that was just 20 seconds. What was that experience like for you? How did you feel when listening to the stories? How did you react? And how might you have felt if the experience kept going longer? Do you think that you might have turned off the recording or skipped ahead? Maybe you might have gotten angry and said or thought something uncharacteristic as an expression of frustration. Imagine how your self-worth might be impacted if you had similar experiences all day long, every day. Perhaps you might become more passive in conversations or withdraw from social situations. This exercise gives us a small inkling of the kind of challenges a person living with dementia may face when their brain's ability to filter or differentiate sounds and background noises changes. Over the years, we've heard from people with dementia that the experience of living with the disease can bring about a wide range of challenging emotions. Having experienced the previous recording, can you better understand where these kinds of feelings might come from? If you're caring for a person living with dementia, how might these feelings relate to your own experience of supporting someone with cognitive changes? There is an older but quite excellent book we often recommend called Talking to Alzheimer's by Claudia Strauss. Strauss says communication is more than a transfer of information. It's the forming of a connection that includes heart, soul, thoughts, and feelings. Because of the damage occurring in the brain, particularly in the hippocampus and temporal lobes, it is not possible for most people with dementia to learn new ways of communicating. They may also, again because of changes in the brain, be unaware of the need to try new ways of communicating. Therefore, caregivers, family members, friends, and healthcare professionals must change their communication styles in an effort to stay connected to the person with dementia. They can't change, but we can. Because communication is a key determinant of a person's dignity, self-worth, and quality of life, it's important that we learn communication strategies that will set the person with dementia up for success as much as possible. As the person with dementia's ability to understand speech is impaired, they may be looking for cues in the way we communicate. Communication becomes much more than a transfer of words, but a powerful way to transfer emotions such as compassion, patience, and understanding. What are some of the other ways we communicate? Do you think the volume of our voice matters? Does it mean anything if you're talking to someone who's slumped in the chair with their arms crossed? Or if someone is speaking in a much higher pitch? Absolutely, the pitch and tone of our voice conveys emotion, authenticity, compassion. Nonverbal body language like posture or body positioning, gestures, touch, our facial expressions and our eyes all convey meaning. I remember my neighbor's young son listening to his mom tell a bunch of her friends about a situation that she said she was happy about. He interrupted with, "Why don't you tell your face?" Our nonverbal communication speaks as loudly as, and sometimes more loudly, than our words. Look at this image. What do you think is going on here? What do you think these two people might be saying to each other? Do you think they are interacting as equals? What do you think is the tone of this interaction? That is, do you think it's a friendly exchange or a heated one? What did you base your interpretation on? Often, people respond to these questions by saying that one person's hand is outstretched to the other, or that the bigger figure is being directive or corrective to the smaller figure. Perhaps you think the smaller person's head is bowed and they are feeling bad. You might think that the arm position of the smaller person indicates that they're feeling confused or baffled. I love to share this image because it shows that our brains are so hardwired to read body language that we actually try to interpret body language and create a story even when there are no bodies to read. This image is really just a series of ovals and circles pushed together, and our brains still give us information about what it sees as communication and tries to weave a story together out of what it sees. Someone once shared that they thought the larger person was inviting the smaller to dance. Now that we understand many of the things that are involved in how we communicate, I'm going to share 10 strategies for responding. Some of these strategies may or may not be relevant to you depending on the stage of dementia. They may become more applicable as the disease progresses. First is to get the person's attention by approaching slowly, calmly, and from the front. A person with dementia may experience loss of peripheral and up and down vision, and so may only be able to see straight ahead. Therefore, it can be startling if you approach them from the side or behind. If the person is upset or emotional, it can help to establish a calm, caring atmosphere. Your calmness may help to settle the person. And use touch to get their attention when appropriate. For example, a gentle pat on the shoulder or forearm if they see you coming. So don't reach up and get their attention with a pat from behind. And call them by their name. Respect their status. Don't use elder speak. Ask the person if they would like your help. Position yourself to make eye contact by facing the person directly when speaking. This may require you to sit to be at eye level. Assess what their body language is telling you at this point. Is this a good time? Do they recognize you? Do they feel threatened or afraid? It's important to be aware of your own body language, such as gestures, facial expression, and posture. Bring the person to a quiet place. This is also referred to as setting the stage. People living with dementia may have a short attention span and have trouble filtering out other noises in the environment, such as traffic or other conversations. Remember back to the example earlier. Too much activity around an individual can also make it difficult for them to concentrate, so it may be necessary to move to a quieter place, or at the least, minimize background noise by turning off the radio, TV, and other distractions. Make sure the person has their glasses, hearing aid, dentures, those kinds of things. Pronounce your words clearly. Remember that the person's brain may be processing information more slowly than yours, so the pace of your conversation will depend on the person's ability and where they are at in the disease progression. A person in the early stage of dementia may only require greater enunciation, while a person in middle stage may require you to speak clearly and very simply. Do your best to match your pace to the person's ability so that you don't come across as talking down to the person. Be aware of your tone of voice. What is it saying about your emotions? If it might be communicating anger or frustration, can you take a breath and regroup before you engage in communication? Lower pitch, as is common with male voices, may be easier to hear, especially if the person also has some hearing loss. Higher pitch can be more difficult to understand and may signal that you are upset. Use short, familiar words and phrases. For example, if your mom grew up saying loo instead of toilet, asking if she needs to use the loo will likely be more familiar and easier for her to understand. Changes to executive functioning will also make abstract sayings more difficult to understand, such as, the cat's out of the bag now, or it's raining cats and dogs. Try to be as positive and reassuring as you can. You won't be perfect all the time, so do not be too hard on yourself if you have bad days. No one gets it right all of the time. Share one message or idea at a time and break tasks into small, simple steps. You may have to allow the person time to absorb one sentence before moving on to the next. Do they understand what you're asking? Try not to overwhelm the person with too many choices. One or two choices maximum so that they have an easier time of choosing. Use your knowledge of the person, their likes and dislikes, to help you narrow down the choices. For example, rather than asking, "What would you like to do this afternoon?" you might say, "Would you like to do a puzzle together or watch tennis?" Show as you talk when you can. Use cues and gestures to demonstrate and clarify your words. Remember that it's possible for the person to have lost their ability to understand the meaning of words, but they may recognize the object or task if they see it. For example, if you're asking a person to sit down, point to the chair, and it may also be helpful if you sit down next to them. Use close-ended questions. Those are questions that have a yes or no answer. So instead of, "What would you like for breakfast?" you might ask, "Would you like toast for breakfast?" Allow time for response. Allow plenty of time. It may take a while for the person to gather his or her thoughts. Whenever possible, ask if the person would like help finding a word, finishing a sentence, or telling a story. They may be relieved to receive the help, or they may feel they want some more time to try and remember on their own. This is especially effective when the person has insight and can reflect on their wants and needs. It's more difficult when the person has limited or has lost insight and is unable to understand that anything is wrong with them. Listen carefully and respond to feelings, not stories. It's a wonderful phrase. For truly hearing and listening, we need to use our ears, our eyes, and our minds. Sometimes there's nothing you can do to solve the issue at hand. For example, wanting to go home when they're already home. Or sometimes what the person is asking for is not possible. For example, wanting to visit a family member who has long ago passed away. One strategy that might help in these situations is to validate the person with dementia's feelings rather than trying to respond to their requests or stories. The content of the communication doesn't matter so much as the feelings behind it. This is the key behind the term empathetic responding. For example, if someone says it's been a really long time since I've seen you, or worse, you haven't been to visit me in months, it's more important to pay attention to the feelings behind the words rather than to the literal truth of what's been said. The feelings are always right, even if they are about stories that are not objectively real. The person may be feeling lonely and they're missing you. You may be the anchor in what feels like pretty stormy and confusing seas. Rather than launching into a defensive explanation of the fact that you were just there on Friday or yesterday or whenever, it's much better to empathetically respond with something like, "It feels like a long time to me too. It's really good to see you today." Or for someone who's wanting to go home when they are already home, rather than engaging in the, "Will you live here?" Ask them, "What is it that you're looking for?" Or perhaps you can help them to reminisce about something and get a sense of what it is that is prompting the emotion of wanting to go home. Watch for nonverbal cues, facial expressions, and body language. Do these match their words? If not, what might they be trying to tell you? And that ties closely into our next strategy, which is connect, don't correct. That is, don't argue. It's a lose-lose situation. Both parties will be frustrated and neither will be right in the end because the argument is taking place in two separate realities. A better strategy is to try and join the person with dementia in their reality as much as possible. While it's always best not to argue, this strategy will be easier in some cases and more difficult in others, depending on the nature of the thoughts or ideas behind the exchange. It may be easy to agree in some cases. For example, if the person is hallucinating and he or she is pleased by the kittens they see in the room, versus if the person is accusing people of stealing from them and is very angry and afraid because of it. In difficult situations, the right thing to say might be whatever works to comfort the person with dementia in the moment. Respond with empathy instead of facts. As an example, if the person feels that you forgot to tell them about a doctor appointment, it's better to apologize to them and acknowledge that they feel frustrated, their reality, rather than try to convince them that you have told them several times, your reality. You could say something like, "I can see how frustrated you are. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you before. I thought that I had. But the doctor is hard to get in to see, and I'm hoping we can still go. Can I help you get ready? It can be very difficult to take the blame for things. It can help if you imagine coating yourself in an imaginary Teflon coat so that nothing will stick to you. For example, the doctor said that you have dementia, or the health authority has said that you need to attend the adult day program, or the Department of Motor Vehicles said that you need a driving test. The primary care partner can often be the focus of all the anger and frustration from a person with dementia. It needs to be a conscious discipline to push all the negative changes onto others and away from yourself. And this allows you to be the helper, their comrade, their number one ally. If you are having difficulty understanding, try repeating or rephrasing what they said and asking if you understood correctly. This may help the person further clarify what they're trying to tell you. You may also want to try rephrasing your own question, or you can try again later. Teepa Snow is an occupational therapist with over 40 years of clinical practice experience and is one of the world's leading educators on caring for people living with dementia. Let's watch a short video with Teepa of some phrases that can be helpful for caregivers, not only when communicating with a person living with dementia, but with anyone. We all have a need to feel heard and validated. You may find that the phrases used in this video are also helpful for other relationships in your life.
And you need to practice. Here's what I want you to say. Move this hand out from between the two of you, because what you're doing is letting whatever you're worried about get between the relationship, and that's not going to help you in this case. Because what starts to happen is you don't even see the person. You're so busy being upset about whatever that is, you're forgetting about this relationship, which is the most important thing. Look at your person. Really look at them now. Turn and look. I know. Yeah. And here's what I'm going to have you say to them. You ready? I'm sorry, I was trying to help. Now, as soon as they say that, what happens? Your intensity goes way down because they're apologizing for really intruding. And it's an acknowledgement that what they did wasn't the right thing for you. And that's a real important thing to get out there. Now, let me show you the next time. We've got some more words to practice. Okay, here's the second word you're going to practice. I'm sorry I made you angry. Try that one. I know. You're absolutely right. I had no business making you feel like that. So try that one. I'm sorry I made you angry. I'm sorry I embarrassed you. I'm sorry I made you feel stupid. I'm sorry I didn't mean to, but I treated you like a child. Now here's one of my favorites. I'm sorry. This is hard. Because what I'm acknowledging is this is really hard for me too. Because the person with dementia thinks we're in this and that we're not having a hard time. It is incredibly important that you say out loud how hard this is. Because if you don't tell me, you think I know, and I don't. All I know is you think you're the boss of everything. All I know is you seem to know everything I can't hang on to. All I know is every time I see you, you start. And you need to be able to say, I'm sorry, Mom, this is really hard. And sound like you mean it. And you'll be amazed how many times people will immediately back down and say, I know it's hard for me too. And suddenly you're in a different place than you were. And that's because you were willing to do something different.
Adjusting to the changes in communication as dementia progresses is difficult for both of you, the person living with the disease and the care partner. But there are some things that you can do to help cope. As much as possible, try to stay positive and patient. Practicing good self-care will help you succeed in this more often. We often hear from caregivers that they lose patients most often when they are tired. Getting a good rest, taking breaks, and accepting help are all ways that caregivers can maintain their strength. Use humor when appropriate. We hear from caregivers that if you don't laugh, you'll be crying all the time. Laughing can certainly help both of you through very difficult times. Humor can bring light to frustrating situations, and it can also tighten or maintain bonds between family members and people with dementia when it feels like the disease is continuing to pull you apart. There could, however, be situations where the person with dementia is feeling very angry, frustrated, or afraid, and humor may not be understood or well received in these moments. Look for nonverbal signs as to whether humor would be appropriate strategy in the moment. And try not to take things personally. I know this can be much easier said than done sometimes, but try to remember that it's the disease that's causing the symptoms. The person with dementia is not doing or saying these things on purpose. When the person with dementia says or does things that are hurtful to you, try to mentally or visually separate the disease from the person. A husband told us once that he gave the disease a name, owls, for example. He used owls. And so when his wife was saying difficult or hurtful things, he would say to himself, owls did it. And sometimes he would even imagine the letters in front of her face so that it helped him visually see that it was the disease that was saying these things, not his wife of over 40 years. This can help to bring some levity to the situation for both of you. So as we're closing up, I hope that understanding a bit more about how dementia impacts communication is helped, and that you've made note of a couple of strategies you're going to try. If you have a question about anything dementia related, whether from this video or any other question, please don't hesitate to call the First Link Dementia Helpline. Our staff are a wonderful resource to strategize with, to answer questions, or even just for those times when you need to talk to someone else who understands the dementia journey. This support is available in BC in Punjabi, Hindi, Urdu, Cantonese, and Mandarin, Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. Support in English is available in BC Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 8 p.m. And in the Yukon, English is available Monday to Friday, 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Mountain Time.